All right, ready for a deep dive. Today we're tackling the Spanish Empire.
Ooh, fascinating stuff.
It really is. But we're not just listing dates and names, we're going deeper.
Yeah.
Like what made this empire tick?
Yeah.
How is it still impacting us today?
Right, the lasting impact.
And maybe we'll uncover some surprises along the way.
Always fun to unearth those hidden gems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our main source, believe it or not,
Make me guess.
the Wikipedia article on the Spanish Empire.
You're kidding? That dry old thing.
I know, right? But seriously, don't underestimate it. It's packed with details.
I'll admit, I'm intrigued. It is a gold mine when you really dig in.
Okay, so we're talking about an empire that stretched from the Philippines to Peru.
Yeah.
I mean, where do we even begin?
Well, we got to start somewhere, right?
Might as well be the beginning.
Exactly. Let's rewind to the HAW. Everyone knows Ferdinand and Isabella. But their marriage, it wasn't just some royal gossip.
Oh, right. It literally unified Spain.
Unified Spain, kick-started their expansion, the whole shebang.
I always forget that was a power move, not just a love story.
Oh, absolutely. 4D chess, my friend. They used marriage alliances like nobody's business.
To box in France, right. Their longtime rivals.
Exactly. Their daughters.
Yeah.
Married into the Portuguese, English, and Habsburg royal families. Talk about expanding your influence.
Wow, I mean, talk about playing the long game.
No kidding. And speaking of long games, while they were busy becoming Europe's in-laws...
Columbus set sail. What a coincidence, huh?
Well, not exactly a coincidence. See, Spain and Portugal, they were already in this race to the east.
Right. Spice trade, all.
Exactly. But the Treaty of Alcasovas in 1479, it basically blocked Castile from sailing south down the African coast, you see. They needed a new route.
So Columbus going west, that was their workaround.
Bingo. Sneaky, right?
Very sneaky. And it paid off at least for a while.
Oh, yeah, at least at first. But it highlights something about the Spanish Empire.
What's that?
It wasn't just about brute force. Diplomacy played a huge role.
And luck. Don't forget luck.
Oh, absolutely. A hefty dose of luck. And speaking of luck, gold.
Mountains of it.
Mountains of it. But here's the thing.
What's that?
That flood of gold from the Americas, it actually hurt them in the long run.
Wait, really? How?
Ever heard the saying, everything in Spain is expensive except for silver?
Yeah, kind of ironic, isn't it?
Totally. That wealth, it caused massive inflation.
Makes sense.
And instead of investing it back home, the Spanish Habsburgs, they used it to fund wars across Europe.
So they became dependent on the gold, but it also made them a target.
Exactly. Add to that, they didn't diversify their economy, reliant on extracting resources, which made them vulnerable.
Vulnerable how?
Competition, smuggling, you name it. There's even this crazy story, this Dutch privateer, Piet Hein, he captured their entire silver fleet.
The entire fleet. Are you serious?
Dead serious. Bankrupted the Spanish crown.
Wow. Talk about putting all your eggs in one basket.
Right, and having someone steal the basket.
So they were hooked on gold, made them a target, and then bam! Someone nabs their entire silver stash. Crazy how vulnerable wealth can make you.
It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? But it speaks to the importance of strategy and diversification, especially when you're dealing with an empire of that magnitude.
Right, because they did manage to hold on to it for quite a while.
They did. It's actually pretty impressive how long they maintained control.
So how did they do it? What allowed them to keep such a vast territory for as long as they did?
Well, a few things. Early on, their military was a major factor.
Right, those conquistadors weren't just messing around, were they?
Not at all. We're talking about the Spanish tercios, considered nearly unbeatable in the 16th century.
I've seen those helmets in museums, the conquistador ones.
They weren't just for show.
So those tercios, what made them so tough?
They were the elite, basically. Highly disciplined, well-equipped.
Like a well-oiled machine.
Exactly, and they mastered combined arms tactics.
Combined arms, meaning?
Using different types of troops and weaponry together.
Ah, so a coordinated fighting force, not just a bunch of guys with swords.
Precisely. And those tactics, they were essential for expanding and controlling the empire.
Makes sense. But military might can only get you so far, right? How did they manage the day-to-day of running an empire that huge?
It was a whole system, really. Different administrative bodies, officials, you name it. One key player was the Council of the Indies.
What did they do?
They were responsible for proposing laws and overseeing how the colonies were governed.
From all the way over in Spain.
Yep. Imagine the challenges, the distance, the communication delays.
No kidding. That's like trying to manage a company through carrier pigeon.
Basically. And to enforce those laws, they appointed viceroys.
Viceroys.
Yeah, like mini-kings, basically.
And mini kings with a direct line to the crown.
Not always so direct. Remember the distance.
Right. So much could go wrong, so much potential for, well, misinterpretation of the rules.
Exactly. And things did go wrong, let's just say that.
Power and distance. A recipe for trouble since the dawn of time.
Ain't that the truth? But we've talked about the Spanish side of things. What about the people actually living in these colonies?
Right. How did this impact their daily lives? We got to talk about that.
Absolutely, we can't ignore that. But it's a huge EG question. It varied so much, depending on the time period, the location, everything.
Right. Makes sense. But one thing's for sure, the arrival of the Spanish had a huge impact on the native populations.
Profound and lasting impact.
We always hear about history being written by the victors, though. So how do we get a clear picture of what life was like for the people who were conquered and colonized?
That's the tricky part. Our main source, this Wikipedia article, it mainly presents a European perspective.
Figures. So how do we get past that bias?
We have to dig deeper, look for those glimpses into the lives of the indigenous populations.
And are there any specific areas in the article that do that?
There are actually. One that stands out is when the article talks about the encomienda system.
The encomienda system. That rings a bell. Remind me.
Basically, it was a way for the Spanish crown to reward conquistadors and settlers. They were granted control over indigenous labor.
So basically free labor.
Essentially, on paper, it was supposed to be mutually beneficial.
Mutually beneficial. How so?
The encomenderos, as they were called, they were supposed to protect the indigenous people, teach them about Christianity, and in return, utilize their labor.
Okay, so kind of like a feudal system. Lords and labor in exchange for protection.
There are definitely parallels. But in reality...
Yeah, reality rarely lives up to the hype, does it?
Exactly. The encomienda system often devolved into exploitation and abuse.
Not surprising, sadly. What kinds of abuse are we talking about?
Forced labor in brutal conditions. Mines, plantations, you name it, often for little to no compensation.
So much for that mutually beneficial arrangement.
Right. It was designed to funnel wealth back to Spain. And the human cost was tragic. Many indigenous people died from overwork, disease, mistreatment.
It's a chilling reminder of how systems designed to benefit one group often come at the expense of others.
A recurring theme throughout history, unfortunately. But it's important to remember that not everyone was okay with this.
Really? Were there people who spoke out against these injustices?
Oh, yeah. Even within the Spanish establishment, there were dissenting voices. Bartolomé de las Casas, a Dominican friar.
Okay, I've heard that name before.
He became a fierce critic of the encomienda system, dedicated his life to fighting for the rights of the indigenous peoples.
Wow. That's pretty brave considering the power dynamics at play.
He was relentless. His writings, his activism, they shone a light on what was happening. And his work ultimately contributed to the development of the new laws in 1542.
New laws, what were those about?
They aimed to reform the encomienda system, improve the treatment of indigenous people.
Okay, so a step in the right direction. Did it work? Did they actually change things?
They had some impact, definitely. But enacting change within a complex system is never easy.
Right, there's always pushback.
Exactly. The encomenderos, those who benefited from the system, they resisted.
Of course they did. No one gives up power that easily.
And the crown, even if well-intentioned, they had to balance their moral obligations with economic interests.
Ah, that age-old tension, ethics versus profit. It's like a broken record throughout history.
It is. And the Spanish Empire is a perfect case study for how that tension plays out on a global stage.
So, progress, but not without its hiccups.
That's one way to put it. But let's shift gears a bit. We've talked about the economics, the gold, the silver.
What else? What other economic activities were they involved in?
Well, beyond the precious metals, agriculture was huge. Plantations all over the Americas.
Producing what?
Cash crops, mainly. Sugar, tobacco, indigo things in high demand back in Europe.
Right, driving trade and generating wealth.
Exactly. But we can't talk about this prosperity without acknowledging the labor that fueled it.
The indigenous populations they were exploiting.
And the forced labor of enslaved Africans. They were brought over in massive numbers to work on these plantations.
Right, the transatlantic slave trade.
Yeah.
It's horrifying how intertwined economic prosperity often is with exploitation.
It's a tragic pattern. But it raises another question. How did they even manage this massive operation? Moving goods and people across an entire ocean.
Yeah, the logistics must have been mind-boggling.
They had a system for that, the flota system. Fleets of galleons, heavily armed, sailing back and forth.
Galleons. Those massive ships, I can only imagine what a sight that must have been.
Oh, it's a spectacle, for sure, laden with treasure, sailing into port.
Must have been tempting for pirates.
Oh, you bet. The open ocean was a dangerous place. Storms, pirates, rival nations.
So they had internal pressures, external threats, and they're trying to maintain this massive empire. How do they do it?
It was a constant balancing act. They used diplomacy, military force, strategic alliances. They had to be adaptable, cunning, ruthless.
It's amazing they lasted as long as they did.
It is remarkable. But all empires eventually crumble. The Spanish Empire was no different.
So what happened? What led to their decline?
Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was more like death by 1,000 cuts.
Oh, I see. So a bunch of different factors all piling up.
Exactly. You had internal problems, economic mismanagement, remember that dependence on gold,
Right, like we talked about earlier.
and then social unrest, political instability, all eating away at them from the inside.
It's like that saying, Rome wasn't built in a day, and it didn't fall in a day either.
Perfectly put. And don't forget the external pressures. Rival European powers were gaining strength, eyeing their territory, their trade, everything.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Everyone wanted a piece of that pie.
Exactly. And then in the Americas, well, the seeds of independence were being sown, fueled by Enlightenment ideas, resentment towards colonial rule.
It's amazing how those embers of discontent can smolder for so long before erupting.
Isn't it? The Spanish Empire, as powerful as it was, it couldn't contain that desire for self-determination forever.
No empire can, really. It's a testament to the power of that human drive for freedom.
Absolutely. It's a force of nature.
Well said.
Yeah.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have, from Ferdinand and Isabella all the way to the empire's decline.
We've talked about the key players, the systems, the events that shaped it all.
It's been quite a journey.
It really has. And it's clear that the Spanish Empire, it left a mark on the world, a big one.
No doubt about it. Its influence is everywhere, woven into so many cultures, economies, even political systems.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. I mean, look at the Spanish language.
Hundreds of millions of speakers worldwide.
And Catholicism, another huge legacy of their empire.
Right. It's incredible how those influences have echoed through the centuries.
And it goes even further than that. The art, the architecture, the music, even the food.
Oh, absolutely. The Spanish Empire's legacy is this incredible tapestry.
A tapestry woven with European and indigenous threads.
I like that. It's a good way to put it.
It reminds us that history isn't just names and dates in a book,
Right. It's about people, cultures, interactions, exchanges.
all shaping the world we live in, for good and for bad.
Exactly. The Spanish Empire, with all its triumphs and tragedies, its innovations and injustices, it continues to shape us today.
Which is why it's so important to study it, to learn from it.
Absolutely. We can gain valuable insights into power dynamics, colonization, cultural exchange, so much.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've done our part, our deep dive.
We've explored the surface, at least.
Right, and hopefully sparked some curiosity along the way.
Because there's always more to learn, more to uncover.
So don't let the conversation end here. Pick up a book, watch a documentary.
Heck, even dive deeper into that Wikipedia article that got us started.
Exactly. There's a whole world of knowledge out there just waiting to be explored.
And with that, we'll leave you with a final thought. The Spanish Empire, it was built on this vision of a unified global order.
A grand vision.
It was. But as we've seen, that vision, it clashed with the realities on the ground.
The diversity of cultures, the desire for self-determination, the inherent inequalities.
Right. So here's something to ponder. If you were designing a global system today, how would you do it differently? How would you create a world that's both prosperous and equitable?
Something to think about. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those big questions.